Hello, everyone. Glad you could join us. We are going to get started and talk all about CBE programs, but developing a CBE program. With me, and so I'm Rhonda Blackburn. I am the Senior Director for Academic Services and Client Success at Strut Learning. I get the honor to work with a lot of our partners across the U.S. on building CBE programs. But with me, I have Dr. Ashley Nelson. She is from Antioch University, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. Oh, you're muted.
Classic. I'm Ashley Nelson. I work at Antioch University in the online individual Masters of Arts program that I chair. And I've been involved in CBE for over a decade, developing programs and classes for multiple universities.
Thank you. And I also have Dr. Brett Andrews with me, and so I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Rhonda. I appreciate that. I'm in the middle of my transition between two institutions. I have worked at Oklahoma Wesleyan University in Northern Oklahoma for 17 years of my career, and was most recently Senior Vice President of Academic Innovation. And going through the CBE process was a big part of what I did for the last couple of years. I'm making a transition to Belhaven University in Mississippi as a dean there.
Thank you. And we also have Dr. Monica Shukla-Bolmentis from UMass Global, and I'd let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Monica Shukla-Belmontes. I've been with University of Massachusetts Global the last, I want to say, about 15 years. And we've had our competency-based education the last 9 years, and I was one of the foundational members who started that program initially. So we now have about 5 or 6 programs at the time we launched with our first, which is a Bachelor's of Business Administration. And I'm excited to talk to you all today about CBE.
Excellent. And so as we go through this next hour with you, we really want to kind of break down for you what it's like to build a CBE program. What does that look like from the very global of getting it started all the way to what do you do and who do you interact with to get that going? And so I'm actually going to start with Monica, if she can tell us a little bit about how did you actually get, you said that you started that CBE program at UMass Global. How did you actually get that started? I'm going to say you're on mute.
There we go. Perfect. So when we started our competency-based program, we really started with a little bit of research and insight at a high level to find out what are the skill sets that are needed and required for our graduates for that type of program. So we started with looking at like the Department of Labor skill sets. We looked at ONET data. And then we looked at the technology. It was kind of our second piece, is what LMS system will support the growth of scale of our students and what we're looking at. And we had currently, our institution was on Blackboard. But Blackboard was not going to allow the type of flexibility that we were looking for this type of program. So we wanted to make sure that we could include, let's say, thousands of students that may be at different points within the program. Our program is self-paced. So the idea is that students could join at any time, that competency, and could be at any point within the competency. And so having the Strut Learning platform, that was kind of our second step. So first step was what competencies and skill sets were required. Second step was what technology infrastructure would help support the students in that program. And then third was looking at what faculty resources we would need for both the building in terms of subject matter expertise, the competency structure, the program structure, administrative support, for example. So what would we need in terms of student support services, faculty support services, but really working on all of those levels at the same time. So looking at the actual curriculum, competency content, faculty student resources, and the technology were kind of the 3 big buckets that we looked at first when we started our program.
Thank you. Perfect. Yeah. And you brought up a great point is what is that program when you first started thinking about that program? I know y'all are, students can join at any time. They're not bound by a semester. it's a little different than what some other people do when they join or they develop a program. So what made y'all decide to go in the direction that y'all went in to do your CBE program?
Absolutely. And I think whether you do self-paced or have more of a structured approach, one of the things that we really needed was really robust student metrics. So really clear understanding of where is the student at, and not just when did they last log in, because we can get from Blackboard when they last logged in, but I can't quite see the learner's path, how much they've completed, what they've completed, when they completed it, any at-risk indicators, for example. It's a little hard to find out where the students are at. And that was a challenge with traditional LMS systems. So one of the things that really geared us towards the direction we ended up going, which was with Strut Learning Platform, was that as an administrator, I can see where the faculty are at, and the faculty can see where the students are at. And also our academic coaches can see where the students are at. So whether it's self-paced or it's at a modulated kind of week-by-week basis, or whatever the structure might be for your program, the strength was really being able to have robust reports. And it's been great to be able to see, like I mentioned, how many final assessments a student has completed within, let's say, a year, or how many milestones, which are our discussion board posts, students have completed within a 6-month period or a 1-week period. We're able to help students with pace and progress to let them know where they're at, where they stand, their last login, their last substantive activity. And throughout that process, the faculty members can dive in and really see at a granular level where students are struggling or facing any challenges, and then they can address it. And similarly, from a curriculum standpoint, the strength of the Strut Learning Platform for me was that I can actually see where there's bottlenecks in the entire curriculum process. So overall, do I see, how long does it take a student to fulfill that competency, which is similar to a course? So if students on average are taking, let's say, 3 months for one of the competencies, and all of a sudden we have one that's taking 9 months, why is it taking 9 months, and where are students getting stuck? And so because I'm able to see the really robust analytics, I'm able to see the back end, which competency, which objective, which milestone or topic area is slowing students down, and then provide more resources in that area. So that strength has been really beneficial to our program success.
Now that's, to me, that anytime you come down to anything that is online, you don't really see your students and know where they are. Those analytics, I think, become so important. And I love what you were saying, that being able to see where students are, and are all students getting stuck? I mean, is it because a particular competency is just real dense and it just takes a long time for them to get through it? Or is it, well, maybe that assessment wasn't the best, maybe we need to relook at what that curriculum looks like. So Brett, I know that you just left an institution and y'all were actually putting together a program. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided to put together your program at your school?
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me give you a little background. So Oklahoma Wesleyan University, at least in our state, was or has always been an early adopter. We were the first ones into the adult market, the online lockstep modular compressed timeline. So we've gained a lot of experience in that market over the last 2.5 decades, and we called upon that to help us understand how our customers, our students, wanted to engage the university. And so that was really important for us. We decided to do something a little bit different than what Monica just explained. We decided to go for a term-based, credit-based CBE program. Our most popular program on the undergraduate side is the Bachelor's of Business Administration, so that's one we went through first. We also have an MBA that should be opening sometime this fall in CBE as well. So with that, it was a concern to me at my institution, where we're a smaller institution, we have limited resources, we have limited personnel. And in order to get this across the finish line, it was important for me to think about that narrow neck of the bottle, if you will, the limitations that I had that would pinch me the most, and it's really personnel on the other side of campus. It was pretty easy within the School of Business to help them walk through how is the curriculum different? How do we design this differently? Monica gave a great introduction on how that gets done. And then it's the technology piece, and then it's the customer service piece. Those are essentially the three buckets that we looked at. But the biggest piece that we ran into were some limitations with our SIS system. And so we decided to do a change out on that a couple of years ago. It is complete now. And also it was a completely new paradigm in our financial aid office, as well as the registrar's office. And so, so with the advice of a lot of other people like yourselves who have done CBE before, and I called and talked to, hey, what should I know before I start this path? I was advised to set it up this way, and it was very easily approved by the Higher Learning Commission. Or at least they didn't give us any issues. They just said yes. And the implementation, because it's term-based, fits within the paradigm of those folks on the other side of campus. Because it is credit-based, it means that I took the competencies and grouped them together with what everybody else on campus roughly thinks of as a 3-credit-hour class. And so we already have content areas that are defined by our professional accrediting body within the school business stat institution. But then what we had to do was, because CBE is not content-based, it's outcomes-based. It's what should a bachelor's degree holder in business administration be able to look, see, think, and do. And so that took a lot of the design time on the front ends. But once I had that, then it was simply about, what am I going to use to, what kind of LMS am I going to put this in? We found Strut Learning. How do I need to train people differently who are going to be touching the student at some point along the way? So that's kind of the 10,000-foot tour of what we went through and what we did.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Ashley, I know that you have worked with a lot of different people across the trying to get started on CBE programs. What are some of the things that when you see that they get started that you would need to kind of guide them or help them with at the very beginning when they're getting started? What were some of the things that you helped them go through?
One of the major things that hasn't been touched on just a little bit in this panel is the culture shift, which is what you were talking a little bit about, Brett. But there's a big culture shift that needs to happen when you go to CBE. And there's a lot of people that don't quite understand how big of a shift it is. And some are very unwilling to make that shift. Brett said it well. He said it's like outcome based. And, people are like, oh, that's what I do already. And then you're like, oh, but let's really talk about the industry and what the job really is and what you really need to do in that job. And then we kind of design backwards accordingly. And that really shifts a lot of people, because in higher education, it's mainly content based. And it's all about knowledge bits, which is great, but it's not that application piece. It's not like, how are you going to apply that knowledge in the workplace? And so a lot of the time that I've spent is really working with admin and faculty to really understand that shift.
Well, that's wonderful. And, I love that you touched on the backwards design. A lot of times when we get into the course level, and just let everyone know here that our next webinar is going to be on course design in CBE, but it's also going at that higher level. When you think about program, especially CBE, you really have to start with backwards design in mind, even at the program level. So I'm going to just kind of throw this out there to all of you to help us understand, what did that look like for you when you were going through this process?
I'm glad to jump in and start. So backwards design at the program level for us really meant that outcomes-based approach as well, as Brett had mentioned. Exactly, really looking at what do we want our student learners to be able to demonstrate at the completion of this program. And we looked at also value scoring rubrics, for example, as a next step to look at our final assessments, and how would we assess that level of mastery? What is the best type of assessment, and what would they encounter in the real world? And what would that look like? What could they apply right away? Very much a theory to practice based approach. So not just the theoretical, but also the applications, the foundations, almost like a portfolio deliverable that they could take away All of those were part of our building process and our strategy. We also looked at breaking down the idea of traditional curriculum content, so breaking it down and shifting away from the idea of everything needs to be within one set discipline, but more interdisciplinary thought as well. And so what we were able to do within the Strut Learning platform, for example, is that we were able to actually break down all of our learning objectives as part of the platform. So students right away know what the program objectives are, what the course objectives are, and they can see that higher level thought process of where it scaffolds. So that was a really big piece for us, is the backwards design, but scaffolding to somebody who's going to be a very effective business professional at the end. Rather than focusing on the content first, exactly like Brett mentioned, moving away from the content directing the learning, but more the learning outcomes directing the content that students would need.
Monica, can I ask a brief question?
Sure.
Is the program you're describing, could it be classified as direct assessment?
Yes, yeah, we
Okay.
do use a direct assessment model.
That's what I thought. Okay. Rhonda, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So basically looking at the program level, we everyone on this panel has done like backwards design at the course level, but really kind of thinking at that, the bigger program level, how was that backwards design philosophy put into place as you were going through the process of putting together your program?
Yeah, that was a big challenge. The number one thing that I kept coming up against, if you will, paradigm-wise, with my faculty, my subject matter experts that I was working with, is they fall back pretty easily and pretty often into kind of the old way of, I put together a syllabus like this. And a lot of that gets, I'm going to blame the textbook companies here for a minute, so I hope nobody's on from one of those. They do such a good job about pre-formatting a textbook, all the ancillaries, etc., that faculty, unless they're just a nerd about curriculum like me, you begin to get into this, well, I always cover that subject. But if you're essentially applying an on-the-job learning model to what we do in higher education, which is an overly simplified way of explaining CBE, you have to go back and question your assumptions about, look, from the get-go, at the top, what does this graduate need to be able to do? How is it that this particular major adds value in the workplace? And we have to start there and look backwards into, okay, so if they need to be able to read an income statement and a balance sheet, where do we begin on that? And I know we can, get a book with 32 chapters and go through it in 2 semesters or whatever the paradigm is. But you kind of have to question, do you need to do that? And that's the genius about CBE, is everybody starts in a different place. And that formative and then summative assessment will very quickly tell you what kind of student you have on your hands, what their background knowledge and skills are, and allows them to cut down the time as they travel through the CBE path. So that was really the big issue. I think everybody on my campus, at least, got it. They kind of understood the way that I had explained it. But then when we started kind of the next level down, okay, here's our last, accreditation review from the professional body, et cetera, here are the standards. And then it was me going through and saying, can you see how, here are the assumptions on which these pieces are built? Most of it's content-based stuff. I'm reminded, or was at the time, of that cartoon. We've all seen it, where there's a big math formula on the blackboard, and there's this little black box, and it says, "And here a miracle occurs." There's a little bit of that still in the prescriptive way of teaching a college student, because we present them with all of these things up front, and then we kind of expect that learning has occurred. And if we don't watch that pretty quickly in a traditional paradigm, it gets away from us. So CBE turns that whole thing on its ear. And anyway, that was our journey through that part of the process.
Thank you. Yes.
For us, it was interesting. You mentioned portfolio, Monica, and I think that's where we really started with one of the programs I was part of, where if the person was going to go for a job, what would they want to demonstrate that they could do? So what would be like a portfolio of skills that they could demonstrate? And so we kind of, at the program level, really outlined what a portfolio might look like. And that was the final project. And that was very hard for a lot of people to grasp, because they're like, the final project should be a, comprehensive exam. And we were like, well, but what really, for CBE, it's really about outcomes based. And so we would look at, the 5 different pieces of a portfolio that a student might need in order to go into the job market. And then we designed backwards, and we were like, okay, so for this part of the portfolio, this is what the skills they would need. And then this is how it should be assessed. This is how it's assessed in the workplace. Right? It's not usually a quiz. You don't get quizzes in the workplace. So this is how it's actually assessed. And then we design backwards. And that doesn't mean we never have quizzes, but they're used in a different way to capture learning. It's more as a tool than an assessment. And
No, I love that.
And then,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and then just to retouch again, it's all about scaffolding the CBE processes. And so everything is really connected accordingly. So the last part of your program and what they're trying to come out with, you actually touch on in the very first module that you ever create. So it's very cohesive. It's very aligned. And that's why Strut is so great, because it has that type of platform. So you can see your complete progress through the whole entire program in one shot, which a lot of other LMSs that I've worked with, it's very disjointed, and it's very hard for the student to see the whole entire process. And so, yeah.
Oh, definitely. So a lot of, as y'all were talking, some of the things came to mind. And one was, so you have your competencies or your outcomes that you're expecting. You figure out how in the industry that you want to, that they would be assessed or they would need to use it. So how would you assess them, make sure they could use it that way? How do you get them there? So when you think about curriculum, and, Brett was like, you can get a book that's 32 chapters and they could go through it. We all know that that's not always the best way to do stuff, right? Because there's something called the internet out there that is, pretty robust with a lot of great content. So when you were thinking about putting like the actual curriculum together, what did that look like? Did you go and find a book that maybe students could kind of use as a tool, but then what did that look like for you? Monica, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, perfect. And I can give a couple of examples. So one of them, for instance, we started a Bachelor's of Science in Information Technology program. And so one of the things we looked at with BSIT is that content has to stay updated and current pretty frequently, because even 2-3 years later, it's a new certification. It's a new process. It's a new learning coding language that's the most prevalent in the industry. So one of the things we looked at for our BSIT was we were actually able to look at what types of certifications do students use professionally in the field if they were to be an entry-level IT technician or support specialist or foundational network analyst. So we were able to actually look at some U-Certify and Microsoft certifications as the final assessment. And then we backwards planned from there to look at the backwards design of what content would support learning for that type of certification. So that was really helpful. So what I was able to do with that process was also look at what content was available directly from Strut Learning as well. Previously, Flat World Knowledge, we were able to utilize some of that content to help support that infrastructure. And then also we were able to make sure that the LMS was integrating really well with some of the lab simulations that we wanted to include, so that students would be really well prepared for those IT type of certifications they were going to take. So that was one of the strengths as well, was being able to utilize content that was pre-existing through Strut Learning. And so we were able to utilize that content to help support that program development and content. So definitely utilized what's out there. So first we looked at, again, industry trends, what's popular, what's necessary, what skill sets are really critical. And then those KSAs help to inform our final assessments. And the final assessment informed our competency content and curriculum.
No, that's great. I love that, being able to utilize what is out there and what is needed immediately, right? And one of the things I also think about is those concepts that change pretty quickly. So, is there a way to link to something that would give you that information if they update it on their side? One of the things I think about is APA formatting, right? Um, and the last thing you want to do is have to go through every single one of your pages and change everything, right? And so being able to make sure that you're just linking to the source that is changing, right? So I know that that makes it a little easier over time, especially if it changes quite often, like IT support and all that good stuff. Cybersecurity, I don't know why those things change so quickly, but so I think that that's a great way. Brett, Ashley, I don't know if y'all have.
Yeah, you're hitting on one of my key leadership principles, which is stay out of the middle. At some point, my job is simply to get two people that need to communicate in the same room. And I think a lot of times curriculum gets stale because it gets stuck in the middle. It's not linked, as you were talking about, either dynamically or even indirectly to changing technologies, changing standards, changing laws, rules, regulations, that sort of stuff that happens in the marketplace and either affects the market as a whole or a company in particular. And so often what we will do is, in fact, Oklahoma Wesleyan is in the middle of converting nursing programs now into CBE format. And this is a big part of the conversation is, hey, do you want to use a textbook here, or can we just link to the State Board of Nursing for some of this stuff? Can we link out to this hospital system, which has a great pharmacology site, et cetera, et cetera? And you still need to guide the learning path through some of that based upon what you're trying to accomplish with a competency. But yeah, I think it's appreciated, honestly, on the part of the student, because the fewer books you can have them buy, the better off that they are. And you can't always depend then on books that have gone out of print or something because they're not licensed and you can use them. They're in the public domain. But yeah, computer science, anything related to technology changes overnight. Healthcare changes almost overnight. I mean, it just goes and goes and goes. So we try to link out in our curriculum structure as often as we can.
And I also, you think about as the program goes, obviously you have instructors, subject matter experts, coaches, whatever you want to call them, attached to the student, right? And so being able to say, hey, this brand new book came out, may be a good one for you to maybe look at, instead of actually having it in the curriculum as what the students are going through. It could be a conversation that can happen at a bigger level with their coach or faculty. I think could a nice way to kind of embed some of that stuff as well.
I think, Rhonda, you've hit on something that's really, really important. Since CBE, most of the programs that I've seen are reasonably self-paced on the part of the student. Student engagement is a huge issue, and keeping that student motivated to continue to challenge themselves day in, day out is huge. And I think the biggest challenge that I had to overcome was retraining not the success coach, because they've been doing that in our system for a long time, but the faculty members. And, I went through school in a day when, I got the red pen on my test and got it handed back to me with if I get a sentence that long on what I did wrong, I counted myself lucky. And it was the paradigm of how do we provide feedback in the midst of an assessment that helps the student understand what they did wrong and how they can better themselves. That's one piece. But then to say it in a way that's winsome and helps encourage that student to continue to push forward, even if they didn't get something correct. And so that was the biggest piece that I had to go through. And I had to tap some of my full-time faculty and a couple of my SMEs who were really, really good at this, and have a panel discussion like this with the rest of the faculty on how we engage this process.
No, that's great. Ashley, did you have anything you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to go back just a bit. That was a good point, Britt. My experience in terms of, curriculum choices and things like that, exactly when it's like, working on computer science or cybersecurity, it changes often. But what also is interesting, I had 2 points. One was when we were developing the cybersecurity and we were working on portfolios and things like that, what happened is that a lot of the students weren't passing the certification tests. And the reason why is because they didn't know actually how to take a test. And so as a program, we realized that not only is it really important to have the job, but you also have to be able to pass the test. So we had to actually go back and kind of retool the program to help them learn how to take a multiple choice test, like for CompT or something like that, or A+ computing. And so that was an interesting insight that we hadn't really predicted per se, because we're like, oh, well, they know it so much better. But we remember they still have these old, paradigms of you have to take the certification test. So then we had to really train that. The other thing that was really interesting is most teachers that I have worked with like to link out. And the reason why is because there's so much amazing technology that's changing every day. So, for example, we had one where they linked out to, it was for police investigation. And it was a whole simulation of police investigation that you would never get from a textbook. And you go in and they're like, talk to the witness. What are you going to ask the witness? And it was very complex. And it was just something that, one, the university could never have built, and two, you would never have gotten from a textbook because it's not interactive. And so in that way, like Brett was saying, you get that automatic feedback. Right. So it was like, that was when you ask the witness a yes or no question and then they get, right, it gives you automatic feedback that wasn't probably the correct way of asking it. And so I think that when you have curriculum that's more open, OER and things like that, you have that ability to keep updating where, if you just use a textbook, as you said, right, as soon as the textbook is published, it's already out of date. And so this really helps you stay on the trends and be able to use the technology that's out there. It's an online class. Let's use the technology accordingly.
Definitely. And I love what you're saying about, there's these other ways that, even if people can go into their workplace and be very proficient and know exactly what they're doing, if they don't have that certification, it's a moot point because people are like, no, you have to have that. So part of, I think, the real world is making sure that we know what that real world looks like, right? And if it's cybersecurity or something like that, there is going to be certifications. I think going back to what Monica was saying too, that, hey, there's some of our stuff that ends with Microsoft certification because that's what they need to get to that next step. But along the way, we're also going to make sure that they can apply it to the workplace or talk about it, be able to verbalize what's going on. So I love all of those different parts of that. And so as you're going through this process of developing the program, people start getting in there. What do you do now? What do you do? Do you look for gaps? Do you look for, what is that next step? Kind of that pilot time, right? You get some students in there, they're testing it basically for you, right? What does that part look like?
You're referring to when the students are in the program? I'll just share a couple of things. We have a couple of assessments up front that happen during the application process so that the recruiter, the success coach, as they're vetting that person for their level of perceived success in the program, that we have something objective to work from. So part of this is measuring the success where the student is with what they told us up front. And so because we need to tinker with our application process up front, that helps us because some people are built for CBE and some people are not, and they'll thrive in another area of the university. And then the other is we chose not to wait until a student was done with the program before we did any kind of program level assessment. So we assess two different things along the way. One is customer service. And so we have an advisor's assessment that happens once every academic term, so 3 times a year. That also picks up the faculty roles as well. And then the other is a curricular assessment, and it's more subjective, but that happens when you are 50% of the way through the program to see if there is a perceived value that the student is getting from our program. I know we could do a lot more on assessment, but I kind of operate under the principle of keep it simple, make it work, and then come back another time and make it look pretty when it comes to getting new programs started.
That's great. So Monica, as y'all go through, I mean, y'all have some pretty big programs over the past 9 years. What is y'all's evaluation process, I should say?
Sure. So we initially started with a pilot program of students. So we started with 50 students in our first kind of pilot A launch, and then about another 40 students in pilot B. And to see where we needed some of those additional student support resources at the front. And that actually led us to develop a competency intro module. So almost similar to what Brett described, where you're able to give them a few examples of assessments and kind of see where they're at. We also use kind of a computer adaptive strategy in the beginning with some of our competencies to allow students to see where their prior knowledge is. Not that they would be able to use PLA, but more in terms of they're bringing their own experiences. Where are you at with respect to the competency content you're going to be encountering? And if you have some skill sets already in those areas, you may be able to jump to the content gaps instead of having to review all of the content in the entire competency, because the whole thing is filling gaps in competency knowledge so that they can demonstrate that mastery. So that was one of the pieces that we did, but it was really helpful to have the intro module. And one of the things we've implemented in the last year is actually creating a student success strategies competency, where it sets them up with all of their resources. It lets them get connected with their faculty member, really get a feel for any of the questions they might have. And that's been helpful so that they're really set up for success throughout the program. They understand the expectations, they understand the format, the structure, and they can see if that program is the right fit at the same time, because they're very early on and can decide this is the structure for me, this works, or maybe I need a traditional 8-week format or longer. So it was really helpful to see what the students' needs were and then meet those needs.
Now that's great. I love it when students have that opportunity to really know where they are, where they're going, what that looks like, and how are they going to make it through it. And if it doesn't work for them, maybe there's a way for jump ship early, right? And then go to where you need to go, right? So I love that. Ashley, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, or?
I just got distracted with the chat. Someone asking me about regenerative education. So sorry. No, I mean, I think for us, the main one that I've been involved in that Brett talked about was the curriculum. And so we kind of go back through the curriculum, and we've kind of touched on it before, where we kind of see where people are stopping out. And that's why I think Strut I've been such a big fan of it, because you can see exactly where the student is getting stuck, where the student isn't, how long they've been on one page. It's always been pretty fun for us in a geeky way when we're like, oh my goodness, they spent 30 minutes on this one page, and then we go and we look and we're like, oh, okay, yep, that's why, or, they're stuck on this one assessment and we're trying to figure out, what's going on. And we're like, oh, okay, that's why. But any other LMS I've worked with, you can't get that level of knowledge of what the student experiences. And so we spent, I'm one of those geeks, but I just love looking at the data and being like, oh, okay, this assessment, maybe we didn't scaffold it correctly. Or, oh, maybe this course should have come before this course, or, oh my goodness, people are complaining that we have such a low level of math, maybe we should be able to let them just, test out of that, right? Which you can do with Strut, and then just go into the next one. And so, we spent a lot of time, or at least I spent a lot of time, looking at that level of curriculum at the program level.
And, and I also love that you can do that and know in your curriculum what is working and what's not working, right? Yeah. Is an assessment really doing what it's supposed to do? And so as students go through the program and they graduate and they go into the workforce, and you go back and talk to those people in the workforce and say, hey, are our graduates doing what you're expecting them to do? And it's like, well, this one spot. And you're like, And so you go back, and it's able to keep that connection with your industry, or the industries around you, but also, and making sure that you're getting them the graduates they need, but also being able to say, okay, this curriculum is working well, or hey, this one particular one, we realized they went through it a little too quick, but now we know why. It's because it's not quite as robust as we need it to be, or something, So there's a way to be able to do that and know where you need to go and look at it. So it's interesting. So, oh yes, Ashley.
I just wanted to piggyback on that. Something that I really want to stress when you're developing a program is having those industry partners. You really need to have someone that you can talk to, when you're developing your assessments. Does this make sense? Like, we're in academia, you're in the industry. Like, is this really something that's feasible? Is this really something, how would it be asked in your industry, right? How would you present that? And then just have like a really good relationship, so then you can just go back and forth. And then even when you get the first, round of students, and you have like student examples, they're like, oh, you really need to focus on this. So I really want to just stress having those industry partners and collaborators is just so key to having a good CBE program.
Yes, definitely. And one of the things that I would probably suggest is see if there's someone in that industry that could go through your curriculum, go through your courses. Does the, you were talking earlier about maybe I should put this course before, this competency before this one. Is it, sequenced in the right direction? Is it, is it doing what they want it to do? So having that really strong industry connection just benefits you and the students and the industry all at the same time. So win-win-win all the way around. So one of the things that, we've kind of talked about a little bit was, Monica's like, yes, our students come in, they can, it's self-paced, they can come in whenever they want, leave whenever they finish. Brett's like, okay, we did it by semester, by credit hour, and I know, Ashley, you've worked with different people looking at different ways. One of the things that, people have always talked to me about a lot is how can we make sure that students, when they're finished with something, that they automatically get put into that next course instead of waiting a semester or so more of that kind of that subscription model. I don't know if any of y'all have had experience with that. Would like to talk.
Yeah, we normally enroll our students in a bundle of competencies. So they have about 3 or 4 competencies at a time. And so as they finish one, or some like to do the linear approach of one at a time. Some like to tackle all of objective 1s and all of the competencies, then move to objective 2. So whatever strategy kind of works for that student. And then we have their academic coaches help to support them in enrolling in the next bundle of competencies when they're ready and they've completed that payment period. The other thing, too, that we do for our students, although it's self-paced, we're able to, in the Strut Learning platform, assess their mastery at checkpoints of like formative assessments. I know we'll be talking more about competency design a little bit later, but in general, one of the things that really helped was the regular and substantive interaction policy. So while we allow students to move freely throughout the program, throughout the competency, there is a linear approach in the competency that as they come across this milestone discussion board post, they have to respond to it, then more content releases. So we're able to also check their level of understanding at that step before they move forward. And then as they complete their final assessment and demonstrate overall mastery of that competency, then they have a new competency release.
Now that's great. And so I want to kind of go back real quickly and ask you a little bit more about your bundling. How did you decide? What was that process that y'all went to decide, okay, these we're going to bundle together. These we're going to bundle together. You know, what did that curriculum development design look like at with that?
Absolutely. As it was pre-pandemic about 9-10 years ago, we actually had our arts and sciences faculty, our School of Business faculty. We had each competency on a sticky note with kind of the core competencies that were learned within those courses. So, for example, writing skills, oral communication skills, critical thinking, some of those information literacy, the flags that are kind of really critical to any type of bachelor's program. And then we said, what needs to come first? Which some of it is general education and some of it is also introducing the business concepts early on. So fundamentals of marketing, while they're going to be doing some writing and reading and research and presenting, they also want to get a little bit of a feel for the courses they're going to take in their major, in a sense, early on. So we recognize that. So we created these bundles that were really effectively highlighting those core strengths of writing skills, communication skills, synthesis skills, research, kind of the competencies that would require literature review, for example. So students are using the library early on. So competencies later where they might do a personal SWOT analysis in their social studies type of competency. And then later they're going to do a business SWOT analysis in managerial economics. So we scaffolded the content to where they're learning some of those GE core requirements and later applying them to the business disciplines, while still trying to tie in some of those business competencies early. So leadership, team building, personal leadership. So they're doing personal leadership on the front end early on in an earlier bundle. Then later on, they're going to be doing organizational dynamics and team leadership in that type of structure. So we really looked at scaffolding as a big piece of those bundles, and also what would create a good flow for the students. So what would keep them engaged and motivated and not burnt out that I have 3 writing papers in a row and you know, as opposed to having a little bit of math built in or a little bit of an infographic type marketing course. So that was our structure.
You know, it's funny, every time y'all talk, I want to get really deep into that course design. Of course, that's next time. But that's what the questions that always pop up. It's like, oh, how do you do that? But we'll talk about that next time. So I don't know, Brad or Ashley, if y'all have had experience with helping people with kind of bundling those kind of things and yes, Brad?
Yeah, ours was kind of easy since we took a credit-based approach to this. And this was an existing program. We essentially used the course as its own bucket. And so for us, it was pretty easy to have that first level of competency organization already done for us. So, but from then it was coming down below that and trying to fill them out below that. That was the design challenge. On the enrollment side, I did some personal research with existing programs. And I asked a lot of program heads, how many students are going through your CBE program? How many of them are actually going through faster than normal, slower than normal, and how many are going through at the same speed as they would have done in your regular online program? And of course, I got answers that were reasonably, you know, there was a dispersion there. But what I found was about 10% of the students will jump ahead of everybody else. They'll finish faster than everybody else. About 60% of the students will finish in about the same amount of time as they would have anyway. And then there's 30% that are slower than normal. And that's typically where you're focusing a lot of your effort, trying to figure out, does this person need to remain in the CBE program? Do we need to get them into a program where they can be more robust and move along at a quicker rate? So all of that gathered together, and plus our history with adult students, we came up with pacing plans. And that's what we give to the student. So a student can come into our program and take essentially a half-time, three-quarter time, full-time type of load. And some of that is being driven by if they're using federal financial aid for it, and I have to have them declare at a certain level. One of the things that I had to learn along the way is that it does not hurt a student if they start out at a low level and they take more. It hurts them if they sign up for a big load and then they don't finish them all. So when they do that look back in financial aid, then nobody wants to be in the situation where we have to give money back to the government. So up front, those mechanics were the ones that we had to focus on. That was just unique to us.
Excellent. Yeah. One of the things we talked about kind of early on in this webinar is the idea of that culture change. But I think it's a culture change for students as well. I don't think many students really know, one, how to take a self-paced course and do it well, right? To know that I can finish earlier if I want to, instead of procrastinating and taking longer, or, oh, I didn't finish it in the time I'm supposed to, And so helping them understand, I know, Ashley, we've worked with some faculty members that we've had to help them understand, how long do you really expect them to take to get through this, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've created the, you called it pacing plan, same sort of thing, where it was, in the beginning, when I was first doing this, we were like, oh, it's CBE and everyone's going to understand that it's, you're self-paced and it's going to be so exciting. Everyone's going to go through quickly and this and that. And then, the data start coming in and you're like, oh, actually, some students really love that structure. Some students don't, right? The 10%, they can just go, they're self-directed and they can do it. But, as you're saying, Bert, like the majority sometimes just really like that structure where it's like, no, just tell me I need to finish what by what time. And I need to go, okay, so by this week I need to do what? And they want to get like really specific. And I think it's because, right, that's how the educational model has been for their whole life. They've always been told what to do and when to do it. And so then CBE gives a little bit more freedom. And sometimes that's a little bit scary for the students because they're like, wait a second, what do you mean there's no like deadlines or, however you design it as a program? And so it's a little bit interesting, whereas, as a program, you have to design it with both and in mind, where it's like you want to give the freedom to the student. And then there's students that really just want, tell me what I need to do, when I need to do it. It's a really interesting program design. So it really depends also in terms of if it's for academic credit, right? A lot of times, the ones that we design, same with you, Brett, it's based on financial aid and it's based on these, but the ones that are for, industry, like, grocery managers or something like that, you get to really have the freedom as a program to design that bundled package. And so, we were able to then have this first competency. And then once you pass that competency, then you could go on to the next competency immediately. And we put some stop measures in it because, as Monica said, sometimes you really need to know like the literature review first before you go into the next one. And so we put those stops in accordingly when we bundled them. So then it was, finish this competency, then you can go to the next one. And sometimes we had it where finish this competency and then you have two choices, so we branched it down and then branched it back in. There's lots of very creative ways you can do it.
Yeah, I want to tag on to something Ashley hit on there. Customer education cannot be overstated enough. This is kind of the new paradigm, but just like the online learning conversation 25 years ago was the new way of doing things. And we could have done this whole panel back then talking about how do we learn online, and we've all probably had a similar kind of conversation on our campus with somebody who doesn't like online or thinks computers are just a passing fad. But one of the things that we did was we put together a series of commercial type videos as a customer education piece. And so in either 30-second bites or 60-second bites, we try and explain to them, look, here's how this is different. And so we actually invested quite a bit in that. And so those will roll out as the programs open to help either the recruiters in the field point people back, or the person who's drawn because of an advertisement to our website. Then they have something to engage with, but it's more than just, clicks and impressions. It's really about helping this person understand, is this right for you? Because most of us are probably selling this at a discount, far less than what our campus price tag is. And that's going to attract a lot of students just for the price tag, but that doesn't always mean that it's right for them. And so that customer education piece is actually said is huge.
Definitely. So I want to kind of go back, when you're talking about and that pacing of students, being able to put like benchmarks in place, right? You as a student, you should finish this module within a week. This module is actually going to take you 2 weeks or whatever, right? To be able to help the student and send them alerts to say, hey, I see that you haven't finished this yet. You may want to go in there and finish it if you want to get done on time. And so having that, within Strut, we are able to allow the institution to put in those benchmarks in place, right? To be able to help, hopefully motivate the students, but to get them to understand, and also helps the faculty know and the success coach know that a student is falling behind, or maybe that's a person that you need to reach out to. But also the idea of that sequencing of courses, being able to even bundle, hey, there's 3 courses. Once you finish these next 3 courses are automatically going to open up to you, right? And so having that technology, I don't know, Strut does. And so being able to allow the students to have that ownership of their learning at the same time as being able to learn what they need to do as they're going. So we have about 2 minutes left. I know everyone's kind of keeping an eye on the chat. It doesn't look like too many questions have come through. Definitely, if you have any questions, let us know. But I want to give everyone a few seconds to wrap up. Maybe some tips and tricks or some knowledge that you want to impart on everyone as we close out. Let's start with Monica, since we started with you.
Sure. Biggest piece is just looking at all of the core components of your program. So starting, like Brett mentioned, are you going to be using a direct assessment model or another model? Are you looking at term-based versus self-paced? And then what does the IT infrastructure need to look like to support that decision? And then working backwards to say, what are the core competencies of your program? And then what curriculum will support those competencies? So that's at a very high level, that backwards design structure that we used.
Perfect. Thank you, Monica. Brett?
Wow, tips and tricks. I would say, don't be afraid to ask for help. Trying to explain this to your accrediting body to get your initial permission for this is a trick, because it's still new. And they probably have, in each of those 6 regional areas, their own little unique process for how you get this approved. The DOE has yet another process for how you get monies released. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Realize that this is kind of a basket of squirrels when you're trying to, you're pulling strings and another one shows up. It's complicated, but it gets better. So take the time, wrap your mind around it, and call somebody, call one of us, and we'll be happy to help you. And you can do this. Doesn't have to be a big school with a ton of resources. You can do this. So encouragement, not necessarily tips and tricks, because every university is unique.
Definitely. Thank you, Brett. Ashley?
I would just say enjoy the freedom and the creativity you have with CBE. When you actually start understanding it at a deeper level, you can see just how much freedom and creativity you can bring to it versus other programs and designs.
Well, I want to thank our panelists and also all of you for joining us, and hope to see you on our next one. If you want to go back and look at basics of CBE and also accreditation of CBE, we've already done those webinars and they are posted. But I hope to see you around. Thank you everyone for coming.